Someone won $3 million on a scratch-off ticket in Ohio. When reporters asked if she manifested it, she said yes, absolutely. She'd visualized winning for months, saw herself holding the oversized check, felt the texture of the winning ticket in her mind. And you know what? She also bought tickets twice a week for 8 months. Same gas station, same routine. Spent about $640. Beat odds of roughly 1 in 300 million. So did she manifest it? Or did she just play the game enough times that unlikely became inevitable? That's the question we're actually asking when we talk about manifestation. Not whether people achieve things they focus on, because they obviously do sometimes, but whether the mechanism they're crediting is the mechanism that's actually working. Here's what we know is real. When you decide you want something specific, your brain reorganizes how you see the world. There's a structure in your brainstem called the reticular activating system. It's basically a filter that decides what information reaches your conscious awareness out of the 11 million bits your senses are processing every second. And it prioritizes things you've told it matter. You've experienced this. You buy a car, and suddenly that model is everywhere. The cars were always there. Your brain just wasn't flagging them as important until you made a decision that changed their relevance. Now apply that to goals. If you spend 10 minutes every morning visualizing yourself working at a specific company, your brain starts treating information about that company as high priority. You notice when someone mentions knowing an employee there. You spot a relevant job posting. You register opportunities you would have scrolled past before. Manifestation practitioners call this synchronicity. Neuroscientists call it selective attention. The outcome is identical. But noticing opportunities isn't the same as seizing them. And this is where the second mechanism kicks in. When people describe their manifestation practice, they rarely describe it as passive. They're not just sitting around visualizing. They're taking action, often a lot of it. There's this concept in psychology called behavioral activation. The basic idea is that action creates motivation more reliably than motivation creates action. When you commit to a specific outcome through daily visualization, you create cognitive dissonance if you then don't act on opportunities related to that outcome. You've told yourself every day that you're going to get that job. So when a networking opportunity appears and you don't take it, your brain experiences that mismatch as uncomfortable. And humans resolve dissonance by aligning behavior with stated beliefs. So manifestation practitioners often take more action. They send more emails. They say yes to more opportunities. They're generating more at-bats. And if you take 700 swings instead of 70, you get more hits, even if your batting average stays the same. Manifestation doesn't change your odds per attempt. It increases your attempts. But there's something else happening. Something about how memory works that makes the whole thing feel more magical than it is. Let's say you spend 6 months manifesting a promotion. During that time, you also take on extra projects, show up early, network with senior people, volunteer for high-visibility work. Then, you get promoted. When you tell the story later, which element do you highlight? Research on attribution bias shows you'll credit the thing that felt most distinctive. The extra work was effort, sure, but everyone works hard. The manifestation practice was unusual, personal, something you did in private with intention. So your brain encodes manifestation as the active ingredient, not because you're lying, but because your brain is solving a pattern recognition problem, and the most emotionally salient pattern was the one that felt special. And once you've attributed success to manifestation, confirmation bias kicks in. You start noticing and remembering times it seemed to work. You forget or reinterpret the times you visualized something and nothing happened. Maybe you didn't want it badly enough. Maybe your energy was off. Over time, your memory becomes selectively edited. You genuinely remember the manifestation practice as more central than it was, because memory isn't playback, it's reconstruction. And every time you reconstruct a memory, you rebuild it through the lens of your current beliefs. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because some of what manifestation does is actually useful, just not for the reasons people think. When you publicly declare a goal, you're doing something that sounds spiritual, but is actually social psychology. You're activating your network, making yourself a known node for relevant information. When your friend hears about an apartment opening up and thinks of you, that's not the universe conspiring. That's information routing. You've also created social accountability. There's a reputational cost to quitting now. Humans are exquisitely sensitive to reputational costs because we evolved in small groups where being seen as unreliable could get you excluded. That ancient enforcement mechanism hasn't gone away. So when manifestation teachers say to declare your intentions, they're accidentally correct, just not for mystical reasons. There's also the identity shift. When you start identifying as the person who already has the thing you want, even before you've achieved it, you start making different decisions. You notice different opportunities. You read different books. You have different conversations. This is called possible selves theory, and it's well documented. The future identity you're inhabiting influences your behavior right now. And then there's the ritual aspect. Having a daily manifestation practice creates psychological structure. You can't control whether you get the job, but you can control whether you visualize for 10 minutes this morning. Every time you complete the practice, you've succeeded at something. That micro-success generates momentum, especially during the middle phase of long-term goals, where visible progress has stalled and most people quit. The ritual isn't magic. It's a habit loop. Cue, routine, reward. And habits run automatically, which means they don't drain willpower, which means you keep showing up even when motivation is low. So manifestation works, kind of, in specific ways, for specific people, in specific contexts. It works when your behavior is a load-bearing variable in the outcome. Job interviews, creative work, relationships, anything where your confidence, persistence, and ability to notice opportunities actually matter. It doesn't work when the outcome is purely external. You can't manifest your way out of a structural barrier. You can't visualize away a recession or a housing crisis or systemic discrimination. And this is the part that gets uncomfortable, because the people who succeed with manifestation are often people who already have resources, money, networks, social capital. The manifestation practice unlocks additional risk-taking and persistence, but they're operating from a position where those things can actually compound. If you're working without a safety net, the same behaviors manifestation encourages can be catastrophic. Quitting your job to follow your passion sounds aligned until you can't pay rent. The manifestation framework doesn't acknowledge this. It treats belief as the differentiating variable, which means people with resources who succeed credit their consciousness, and people without resources who fail blame their vibration, when the actual difference is structural position. And that's not just intellectually wrong, it's cruel. But let's say you're in a position where manifestation could be useful, where you have some baseline of resources and the outcome depends partly on your behavior. Should you practice it? Maybe, but practice it intelligently. Use visualization because it primes your reticular activating system, not because it bends reality. Create rituals because they support habit formation, not because they're spiritually potent. Tell people your goals because it activates your network, not because you're sending energy into the universe. And most importantly, stay grounded in feedback. If you're manifesting and taking action and nothing is happening, that's information. Maybe you need to adjust your strategy. Maybe the goal isn't realistic given your current resources. Maybe you're in a domain where luck is the dominant variable and you just haven't gotten lucky yet. Because luck matters, enormously. The lottery winner beat 1 in 300 million odds. If 1 million people had practiced identical manifestation techniques, one of them would have won eventually, purely by chance, and that person would credit manifestation. This is survivorship bias. You only hear from the people who succeeded. The thousands who did the same thing and got nothing don't write books about it. So when someone tells you they manifested their dream, they're not lying. They're accurately reporting their subjective experience. But subjective experience and causal mechanism aren't the same thing. The reticular activating system made them notice more. Behavioral activation made them act more. Confirmation bias made them remember selectively. Attribution bias made them credit the manifestation. All of that happened. But the chain of cause and effect isn't what it feels like from the inside. And here's the thing. The useful parts of manifestation don't require any metaphysical claims. Goal setting works. Visualization works. Identity, alignment works. They work for boring, materialist reasons that have been studied and documented. But they're packaged with claims about vibration and energy and universal response. And those claims make it harder to think clearly about what's actually happening. If you ask me whether to practice manifestation, I'd say use the techniques, but don't mistake the mechanism. Visualize, affirm, create structure around your goals. But don't expect the universe to do the work. And don't blame yourself if you do everything right and it still doesn't happen. Because sometimes you're just playing a game where the odds are bad. And belief doesn't change odds. It just makes losing feel more personal. The woman in Ohio who won the lottery said something surprising when asked if she'd do it again. She said, no. Not because winning was bad, but because the ritual had become the point. The Tuesday and Friday visits, the conversation with the clerk, the moment in the car with unscratched tickets. She said those 8 months were some of the happiest she'd had in years, because she'd had something to hope for, something that felt possible. And that might be what manifestation actually does. Not change outcomes, but change your relationship to outcomes. It gives you permission to imagine your goal as already handled. And that relief from needing to figure everything out right now creates space. Space to breathe. Space to try without being crushed by the uncertainty. That's valuable, genuinely valuable, as long as it doesn't tip into delusion, as long as it doesn't prevent you from seeing reality clearly enough to navigate it. So manifest if it helps, but stay awake. Notice what's actually working. Adjust when feedback tells you to, and build a life that's worth living, whether or not the manifestation lands. Because the future you're visualizing doesn't exist yet. It might never exist, but your life is happening right now. And if you're so focused on what's coming that you miss what's here, you've traded something real for something imaginary. The universe isn't listening. It never was. But you are. And the story you tell yourself about what's possible will shape what you attempt and how long you persist, and whether failure destroys you or just teaches you something. So tell yourself a story that's honest, one that includes luck and effort, and the possibility that you might try everything right and still not get there. But also one that makes room for the trying to matter, even if the outcome doesn't arrive. Because that's the real question. Not whether manifestation works, but whether you can build a meaningful life in the uncertainty between wanting something and maybe getting it. And the answer is yes, you can. People do it every day. They just don't call it manifestation. They call it living.